What's up, YouTube? So today, I think this is a very important topic for me to talk about. It may shock a lot of you, and I'm sure a lot of you purists out there are going to be pretty just flabbergasted by this video and what I'm about to talk about. But what you see right here is probably my favorite tank I've ever kept. Out of all the saltwater tanks I've had everything up to a 120-gallon reef, and this has to be my favorite. Now, hear me out on that. I understand it just looks like one giant clump of Kato. There's real quick. There, damn it. I got a little porcelain crab I just picked up. There's the peppermint shrimp. There's the spiny common star. And a few snails and stuff like that. Now, when I say this is my favorite tank, what could I possibly mean by that? I mean, all things considered, of course, having a giant showpiece tank with a bunch of gorgeous fish darting around and thriving coral and everything like that, obviously that's more aesthetically appealing, right? It's a lot more interesting, it's a lot more dynamic, it's just a lot more impressive overall. But the thing that those tanks have, or rather the thing that this tank has over those, is ease of maintenance. And just really ease of mind. I mean, I don't really have to worry about this tank. Whereas my tanks in the past, the bigger tanks with lots of fish and coral and everything like that were a lot more sensitive. A lot of the joy was kind of sucked out of the hobby for me based on the stress I had to endure in maintaining those tanks. And like I said, with this tank, really it's nothing. I keep a gallon jug on the floor that I top off of RODI water whenever I need to, which is not very often. The water changes are pretty much. I mean, I've only had this tank maybe 2 months, something like that. And the Kato is just totally grown out of hand. I'm gonna go in there and prune it. But yeah, and it's not nearly as green, by the way. The tank itself is not nearly as green as it appears to be in the video. I have no fish in this tank. I've got a fishless fish tank, and yet this might just be my favorite tank. It just, I find, even with my 60-gallon that I had, obviously I would have rather not have lost everything in that tank, of course, especially not the moray. But with that tank, every time I went out to travel, or even if I just went out for a weekend, there was a lot of stress that I had to, just that were kind of, stress that I wasn't quite aware of because I've had tanks for so long that it just seemed kind of normal to me. And I gotta say, this tank, I mean, I don't worry about it. I feed it just, some flakes for the shrimp and the crab and everything, and just to kind of keep the nitrates where they're supposed to be for the algae. I feed it basically whenever I feel like it. Just every couple of days I'll throw in a little bit of flakes. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. And like I said, topping it off. The filter, there's no media cartridges in there, so I don't have to swap any of that out. Nothing like that. I wipe the glass when I feel like it, or at least I wipe the front glass. I leave the sides. I let the side panels do the thing just because for the snails and the starfish and stuff like that. And for the copepods as well. But yeah, overall this is just a very enjoyable tank to keep so far, and I really have no complaints whatsoever. Now, granted, a lot of people, it's a very different reaction that I get from people when they come over to my apartment. Whereas with the 60-gallon, people would always be really in awe, and they'd be pointing out the eel and my flame angel, and they'd like the gorgonians and stuff like that swaying in the current. And so they were really, really impressed by that. Whereas with this tank, sometimes they go, well, what the hell is that? They're like, you got a green afro in the tank, or they say, you don't have a fish, you got a fish tank but no fish, and well, yeah, but what they don't realize is all the work that goes into maintaining a tank like that. Now, granted, I did not have an SBS heavy system. I never have, probably never will. And yet, even then, with my schedule and everything, and my budget, certainly, I'm a college student, so I don't exactly have money, flying out of the wazoo. So, very tight budget. Not a lot of time on my hands, with not doing homework or projects or anything like that. I'm out, having fun with my friends or going to parties and stuff like that. So I just didn't have a lot of time the way I used to when I was in high school to maintain my tank the way it needed to be maintained. And so because of that, the corals didn't really thrive the way they should have, or the way that they deserve to long term. The fish, the fish did fine for the most part. But I knew for a fact I couldn't keep certain fish like anthias or even certain wrasses and stuff like that because of their high metabolism, so their fast metabolism, so I'd had to feed them more often than I really had time to do. And now, granted, it's easy to say, well, you could feed twice a day, but sometimes you have those days where you just get home and you crash, and then you do that a couple days in a row, and you realize, oh Jesus, it's been 2 or 3 days, and I haven't really gotten a chance to feed multiple times a day for these fish. So it was just kind of restrictive. My schedule and my budget, like I said, are very restrictive for me. But this tank was very cheap. It's essentially just a Frankenstein of just miscellaneous equipment I had lying around and miscellaneous animals I had that survived the disaster that occurred in my 60-gallon. And overall, I love this tank. I get to, I'm over here drawing and I get to look over at this tank and see the inner workings, and it really does make me appreciate all these animals that I, back in the day, especially when I had a lot of money, I just didn't think much about. I'd go and I'd buy 5 or 6 peppermint shrimp and toss them in the tank and never really see them, never really look for them. Snails and hermit crabs and stuff like that, they were just kind of a necessity, really, more like utilitarian than anything else. And but here with this tank, these guys are the showpiece animals. So it's just very interesting getting to see up close and personal the peppermint shrimp. That nothing special, $5 peppermint shrimp. This random greenish brown porcelain crab that came in as a hitchhiker at the fish store, $5 as well. Nothing special. This starfish, this $15 starfish. So stuff that normally would be kind of overlooked in a big tank. It's nice kind of being able to sort of see just how they live, and it's just. And at the same time, they're very low bioload, so I don't have to do water changes on this tank, most likely. Again, no fish. I don't really have any plans to add any fish. And if I did, it would be, and not anytime soon, it would be a very tiny fish, maybe like a Trimagobe or something like that. But I don't really feel the need to. I've had so many fish in my time in the hobby. I've been keeping saltwater tanks for the better part of a decade. And I've had so many different fish, and I've had so many, I've had plenty of successes, but I've also had plenty of failures with fish. And so this tank, it's just kind of a nice break, and I really, really enjoy it. And so that's kind of what I wanted to get you guys to think about when you're, considering setting up a saltwater tank, or if you already have one, or if you're upgrading or downgrading or anything like that. Consider, are you getting more joy and more excitement out of this hobby, or are you getting more stress and heartache? Are you having to, every time you go out for the weekend, are you sitting there worrying about your tank nonstop? Is your tank constantly teetering on complete and total disaster? I find a lot of tanks are set up that way, and ultimately that's just a huge stressor. I mean, I had my aunt unfortunately just lost her whole tank this weekend due to the hurricane, and it wouldn't have been nearly as catastrophic had she had not had so many fish. Now, granted, the tank was not overstocked. It had perfectly the amount of fish she had was fine. But in the case of a disaster where the oxygen levels are depleting rapidly, your losses are going to be greater the more fish you have. So that's what I'm saying. I mean, sometimes minimalism is the way to go in general, but also especially in this hobby in particular. And yeah, that's kind of what I want to convey to you guys. Just think about that. If you're setting up a tank, I know that SPS tanks are kind of the latest thing right now, and they have been for some time. But me personally, I don't get enjoyment out of them just because of the amount of like I said, stress that comes along with that. More often than not, these tanks that I find out have just completely died out, have been like, really, really kind of, I don't want to use the word sterile, but low nutrient SPS systems, where the slightest thing can just kind of wipe the whole tank out. And that's just something that really can take you out of the hobby altogether. So just think about that. What's important? Maybe when you're setting up a tank, even if it's a 250-gallon tank or a 300-gallon tank, you can have plenty of fish, but why don't you narrow it down? And this is an issue I've had to kind of come to terms with. Why don't you narrow it down to your favorite fish? The fish that give you the most, that excite you the most, that are not going to add an extra level of stress. Paddle blue tangs are gorgeous fish. I've never kept them because even if they do thrive, any little thing can kind of set them off, and they can come down with ick, or their marine velvet is something that they typically carry, or they can carry a lot of times. I've had to deal with marine velvet, and it can wipe out a tank, and I can tell you right now, it's almost taken me out of the hobby twice now. So certain fish you just have to be aware of. So why don't you just scan your giant stock list you got ready, and why don't you just look at what's really important? What fish is going to maintain your interest? Or fish like Anthias, are you really going to have the time to feed them frequently throughout the day and all that sort of thing. Are you ready for a fish that's going to grow up and become aggressive and kind of make it life hard on all the other fish in your tank and make the tank to watch the tank just all the more stressful? You know, it just comes down to narrowing down what's really important, and to me, that's why I have to say this tank might be my favorite, just because it pretty much nothing but joy and no stress at all, really. I don't have a whole lot invested in this, and it kind of just takes care of itself. And it's nice little. It doesn't take up a whole lot of room. It'd be easy to transport if I had to move, which I will be moving, sooner rather than later. So yeah, I mean, I have no complaints with this tank whatsoever. Not the most extravagant thing on planet Earth, but it makes me happy, and that's really all that matters. My next tank is also going to be very similar. It's very easy. It will have fish. My next tank's going to be larger with fish. But just like I was just saying, I'm going to narrow it down to my favorite fish that bring me joy, that do not bring me stress, and that are hardier rather than more sensitive. But to each their own, and look at your schedule, look at your priorities, and kind of go from there. And yeah, guys, that's my advice for today. But hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you enjoyed staring at my green Refugium tank for a little over 10 minutes now. And leave a comment if you have any comments, questions, whatever. If you want to just rip my tank apart, go ahead. Feel free. And yeah, give the video a like if you like it, and subscribe if you haven't, because I'm really kind of excited for this tank and for the tanks in the future, and I'm really taking this hobby, kind of going at it from a different angle now. But yeah, guys, take it easy.